This discussion is going to be a very definitive but short guide to the Electoral College. It's been a lot of discussion that has come up on that with the last several presidential elections, but we're going to discuss some of the issues related to that. Um, okay, where did the Electoral College come from? It was the Great Compromise. It was in 1787 when the country was being put together. The smaller states had no interest in joining a union that they were going to get outvoted on everything. So they wanted everything to be voted on per state. So somebody like Rhode Island or Delaware would have as much power as Texas. On the other hand, folks in the bigger states didn't like the idea of their power being diminished. So they ended up with this great compromise. They decided rather than have one single legislative body, they would have one legislative body that was based on the number of states, which is the Senate, and one that was based on population, which is the House. And then so they ended up with 100-member Senate. That's two senators for every state, and then the House ended up with 435 legislators based on population. And then they decided, even though that was the Congress, the presidential election, they felt the same way. The smaller states didn't want to be dictated by the larger states, so the presidential election followed suit. So you got 100 senators. So there is some method to the madness of the Electoral College in terms of the counts. There's 100 senators in Congress. There's 435 House of Representatives in Congress, and there's three electoral votes that are given to DC. So the total of that's 538. One half is 269. So that's where the 270 comes from to have a majority. Is the Electoral College antiquated? You could argue that either way, but there was some real justification on why it was enacted the way it was all those years ago. So it's not just a matter that things have changed so much, and if in hindsight we never would have done it that way. So again, whether someone is pro or con Electoral College, there was some real logic involved with that can still be argued today. Um, for people that don't like the idea of it, you've got it would be almost impossible to change. To get a constitutional amendment, you'd have to have first a vote of 2/3 of the House and the Senate, and then once you got the constitutional amendment process begun, then it would have to be ratified, voted on by 3/4 of the states. Well, guess what? More than all of the smaller states would be losing power in the presidential election or the Senate if that was included in the discussion. And so they would never vote for it. The point is, there's no way mathematically to ever get a constitutional amendment enacted because the states would have to agree, and you'll never get 3/4 of the states that would do that because probably half or more of them would be disadvantaged. Um, You've also got the whole urban and suburban deal, even though, yes, it might make sense that it ought to be, each person's vote counting the same. If you really look at a normal election, this happens to be 2016, but most presidential years are the same. If you're looking at this by county, um, the rural areas are a little more inclined to be voting, or a lot more inclined to be voting conservative and Republican, and the urban areas are a lot more inclined to be voting progressive and Democratic. So, that's another logic. If you're trying to figure out, does this whole system make sense? You're trying to weigh plus and minus the interest of the area of the country, in addition to the head count of the country. Um, then, since that's where the electoral college come from, then the next question would be, why do you even need a college? Why did the people need to show up and do this vote? Why not just tabulate it as electoral votes and let that count be the number? Well, you could argue that with particularly with the way our two-party system has evolved. But the whole idea was if somebody didn't have a majority of the votes, let's say there were three candidates running, even if one of them only got a small amount of that. So what the Electoral College allows you to do is everybody to show up and vote. And if no one person gets a majority of the votes, then the person that got the least amount of the votes would 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 be able to maybe negotiate to get to give one of the other candidates the amount of votes they need to get over the hump. So it really doesn't serve a whole lot of purpose nowadays because of the strong two-party system, but there could be a time when it did matter. You could argue pros and cons of electoral college, but I guess bottom line of this discussion is it was done with a purpose at the time. It wasn't just an antiquated, bad decision that we're now stuck with. And whether anybody agrees with that premise or not, for the reasons we've already mentioned, it's very unlikely to be eliminated. So I tried to make this short and hope that we that people like the discussion.